Howdy, you delicious people. I'm here today to do my top 50 Marvel characters. More than likely, a lot of these characters will probably be through the comic books, and you have probably never heard of them in your life, and just be like, oh, maybe I should seek these out and see why he has listed them either so high in this list, or is to have gone on and took the time to even say a word about them. Legitimately, Geekvolution had gone on to give me this template to be able to even go on and put this list together. So I really do thank them, as well as I've also already gone on and submitted a list to Geekvolution. And this one is just to be for a video and is just for fun. And also, while kind of going through this list, I really had to heavily adjust it again and again and again. Hence why me going on and justifiably doing a video so I can just have something out for the day, because I was to just ponder and question and whatever. Also, I'm to be such a freaking geek that I have a Marvel encyclopedia, an updated and expanded book that I had gone on to thumb through to see every single character that I could have probably put on this list, instead of just putting in certain side characters like MJ, Mary Jane, which again, she at some point would have a costume getup, which I am just so remiss and ticked that I didn't go on and put on this list. There are awesome characters that are just visually interesting, like Detroit Steel, or are to be some obscure stuff that are to just be like, man, I would have liked them to have been on this list, but they just sadly were not, for whatever reason. So yeah, I'm sure people would have also forced me to want every single Avenger upon this list. Of course, Steve Rogers and classic Iron Mans and original Thors and Black Panthers, Prowlers, all these certain combination of Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and everything, because they liked the movies, regardless of how the books really turn out. Wild variations and varieties of Spider-Man. I'm sure they are all to be your favorite and not exactly 100% mine. Or legitimately, I could have thrown into any number of different kinds of Spider-Man, because there's about a 50 bajillion of them. And so a lot of people, when going through finally my more interesting pick of Spider-Man, will go on and just be like, well, why didn't you pick paper bag Fantastic Four Spider-Man? That's the one I like the most, and you're picking the Spider-Man. What the fuck? So, legitimately, I'm ruffling feathers, I'm breaking hearts, but at the end of the day, also, I'm listing 50 characters, gosh darn it. If I would have had 100, I would have been able to just legitimately be a much more happier person than having to crunch the numbers and figure out, oh, gee, ooh, golly, who should I put on this list? Because if I would have had 100 slots, this list would have been a lot better, I feel. Um, I don't know if I had gone on and placed characters like Gambit within this list also, but I would have wanted Gambit somewhere on this list. And at some point, maybe I might have to kind of alternate a number of characters that are actually on this list. But anyways, there are also certain characters that I put on here for a gag, and then also, I actually like them. I do, regardless of how they are to just be forgotten about in the Marvel comic book world. So, with that said, let's go on and just break down this list, because I've taken freaking 4 minutes of your time explaining all this in a very fast-like motion, and really I could just finally go and slow it down and talk normally. But that's just how I approach every single video, talking very quickly, because I realize that this is going to take for frickin' ever. So with that said, let's go and talk about my first number one draft pick into what could possibly be an Avengers team of top 10, and then eventually whoever could just be in a Avengers kind of comic book of sorts. So let's go into this. So my very first draft pick is Ghost Rider. In all honesty, like, I feel that another Ghost Rider is drastically different within this list to also say another Ghost Rider within this list of 50. But I'm going to also probably state who that character is at some point within this rattling off of other alternative Ghost Riders. So, of course, obviously, Ghost Rider Johnny Blaze has been used the most. But then again, there is also to be Robbie Reyes's and also Danny Ketch's and Cosmic Ghost Riders. Ghost Riders 2099 and a plethora of just kind of different varieties of Ghost Riders within our time. And with that stated, legitimately, I was to really go on and at some points pick up random issues of Ghost Rider and really enjoy them. But then again, when there is to be one kind of story of Ghost Rider, I would gravitate to those stories much more so than anything else, oftentimes. And realize that within the kind of newer books to current of the second's recording, I would go on and like the Ghost Rider story compared to anything else that is going on with Marvel, because they are just kind of heavily trying to focus so much so on X-Men books rather than actually telling good stories, I feel. Because they are just all caring about selling an X-Men story because eventually the Deadpool movie is going to be a thing. The Deadpool and Wolverine film. And if we're going into the future, I've already seen that movie and seen how good and or bad it is what it is. But anyways, so Ghost Rider is my number one draft pick for a team, and at some point he may not play well with others, but regardless, he is to be my choice because I like him so much so. Yeah, so eventually at some point we also have, like, I think Cosmic Ghost Rider, if I haven't said that already, who is to have been Frank Castle. And cosmetically, that is to be a very much appealing visual choice. And rationally, let's just kind of go on and go into other numbers here. Also, this Gmail is to be a legitimate Gmail that I am to have posted specifically for YouTube stuff. If people want to collab or just dare say have an email to just chat whatever about comic books or movies or shows or whatever, you can go ahead and reach me upon this Gmail, because I didn't want to really legitimately have a Gmail that is to be very personal to me be listed upon this YouTube thing. So I just kind of put this up there. But you can still contact me within that Gmail if you want to go on and do any number of things, YouTube stuffy things, and whatever. But moving on. Number 2 is to be Deadpoolio. So, I can go on and state that I am to like everything that has Deadpool inside of it, whether it is to be a video game, it is to be movies, or eventually is to be comic books. Also, there are to be kind of animated movies like Hulk versus Wolverine that does have Deadpool in it, and that is to be legitimately the best thing about honestly that movie, is to just have been Deadpool with inside of it. But eventually, within the comic books, we would have at some point Deadpool facing off against dead presidents, or have him go on and just have these very unusual stories about having him like have cows involved or all these kind of weird, just goofy things. And at some point I can just appreciate all of those stories for having those kinds of things being done with them. Having him consistently mixed in with characters like Cable or X-Men, or the odd variety of him being involved in certain Thunderbolts teams, or also having him kind of mix it up more currently with Captain America. Yeah, Deadpool is to obviously be very unpredictable, which is to make him be a really good fighter, threat to any number of people. But then also, it is to be hard to really trust him with inside of a team, because a lot of people would just be like, "Hey, man, is he going to sell us out? Is he going to go on to uh, kill us all off when our backs are turned? Like, should we sleep around this guy?" So on, so forth, whatever. But at the end of the day, Deadpool is also to just be really fun. To read his comic books again individually, or having story arcs with Deadpool inside of them. So Deadpool obviously is to be easily a number 2 on my list out of all of the Marvel characters that exist, because of how much outlandish, fun, and fourth wall breaking he legitimately is. Moving on to number 3 is Hulk, Red Hulk. So immediately out of these 3 characters, you're like, man, you must have really liked that one Thunderbolt comic book issue story that was to have had Ghost Rider, Deadpool, and Red Hulk within it. Sadly, I had never gone on and been able to have read that story, but man, would it have been freaking lit to have seen all these characters teamed up together. And also, with the Ghost Rider thing, I had completely forgotten about Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because I'm sure a lot of other people also had forgotten about that. But really, legitimately, I only watched Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to get to the point where I could just justify talking about Ghost Rider. And then after that season was done and over with, I didn't care about that show either which way. I hated the first season, and then also I just went back into the show to just watch to the point of Ghost Rider, and then I freaking left because whatever it was to give me, like that in space story, was dumb. But I did kind of casually watch it, and I hated every bit of it. It was stupid. But they kept bringing back the show for reasons that could not have been rationally with my brain to have a real legitimate purpose. But anyways, Hulk, Red Hulk. Red Hulk is to be seemingly upon the Captain America Brave New World movie, so great for that being an existing thing, because man, have we been waiting that for a million years. But so, Red Hulk and Rolk is to really be a character that is to have a wide different varieties of looks over the years, to really just be somewhat very much similar to the green Bruce Banner Hulk in some ways, but then is to also have a kind of slightly different power set with his flame like powers, uh, which just kind of makes him a better Hulk character because he is to have a little bit different kind of power set than Hulk. But uh like just visually I can go on and like red more so than green. But yeah, Hulk or Red Hulk is to also just kind of have really interesting stories at some point, even much more so than at some point Hulk does. But at some point I will also bring up Bruce Banner Hulk in this. You just wait and see. But yeah, but I always was to find Red Hulk interesting, and at first it was just kind of the mystery of like, who could be the Red Hulk? Who could this character be? And then you find out that it's Thunderbolt Ross. Like, oh, okay, cool. But anyways, let's go on into number 4. Number 4 is the character Legion. And I get it. The show wasn't everybody's bag, or some people don't even know the Legion show exists. Because really, when looking at the views of the Legion show, yeah, nobody really cared about it. When I was to have gone on and I think talked about it, but I don't know if any of those videos are actually still upon this channel. Not quite sure. But anyways, because I don't know if I deleted them or not, because within a long stretch of time, nobody ever looked into them. I don't know. So Legion. Legion is to be a character that has multiple personalities, and every one of those personalities has a power set. Some of them are amazing, like they are to turn into these massive, colossal characters, and some of the powers are to have one character turn into multiple characters, and so on and so forth. Supernatural character, Legion has one of those, and so on and so forth. It's to almost be like the Ben 10 or the Dial H for Hero kind of Swiss Army knife of a character. The only thing is that this character is also just to be crazy. But regardless, if anything, a lot of his X-Men stories, because he's an X-Men character, like stuff like Legion Quest and stuff like amazing stories that are to have been had. That I really just was like, oh my god, like this is to be so much better than whatever the show tried to give me. And whenever I would go on and just kind of look at like this character on paper, I'm like, oh my god, this is just the greatest thing ever. But it's just kind of dealing with the crazy side of this character also. Anyways, moving on. So number 5 is obviously Madeline Pryor. Simply because I just recently checked out X-Men 97, a couple episodes of that. And there was just a really amazing showcasing of this character, and I do realize that yes, she is a Jean Grey clone, and why not to have had Phoenix Jean Grey instead of Madeline Pryor? Because I don't care. I really probably don't care enough about Phoenix Jean Grey to have put her on this list. But then also, there are other characters that are just like Phoenix in a number of ways. That are to have also been on this list instead of actually Phoenix Jean Grey. So, with that said, you're going to find that within this list, Phoenix Jean Grey probably doesn't exist, but I think we could also say that Phoenix Jean Grey could just be an alternate for Madeline Pryor within this number 5 spot. As well as also stuff like Dark Phoenixes and all these other things that at some point people had seen through comic books instead of what eventually ends up becoming that awful film. With that said, Jean Grey has kind of played the fence of her being a good guy and a bad guy, and also towards X-Men 97, Madeline Pryor did by the end of her episode kind of go in between being a good guy and a bad guy. So yeah, so either way, it'll be interesting to just kind of have this character in a team to see what she can really do. But without further ado, let's move on to number 6. Number 6 is Machine Man X-51. So this character, I really realize he's kind of an Inspector Gadget kind of character. And there probably are better robot characters like Apocalypse or Ultron or Vision or whatever the heck else, whatever anybody wants to go on and toss to me here instead of like Machine Man. Really? This pick? What the fuck? You could have picked Joe Costa and it would have been better off. Yeah, so speaking of Joe Costa, Machine Man was to have been involved with Joe Costa in a Marvel zombie story. And really, that was to be my real true enjoyment of Machine Man. So I was to have really wanted him on this list simply for that reasoning. And really, I just liked his skills and how he was to have been a character within here, even though there might have been a better character to have used instead of Machine Man. But anyways, let's move on to number 7. Number 7 is Kid Omega. This is another X-Men character, and you're just gonna be like, who the is this? Yeah, I had honestly played Kid Omega in a Marvel mobile game, and in all honesty, I could not put this character down. I was like, man, I feel that this character just has a way more interesting power set than any other person. So I kept playing it as him, and then I would just kind of rotate other characters in. But I'm like, man, this character is so freaking cool. And he's to just kind of be kind of like a Psylocke character or a Gambit kind of character. And at some point, I don't know exactly if Gambit is to be on this list, but he should be at some certain point. There might be some alternative things that I just might be like, well, yeah, Gambit should have probably fit here if he isn't on here. But Kid Omega is to just be a visually interesting character when you were to see his pink mohawk and his glasses and his outfit. Really is to just be this standout character that I really was to have gone on and wanted him on some kind of team because he is just very interesting as far as power set is to be concerned or to go with. Moving on to number 8, Arcade. So for those of you that didn't check out Avengers Arena, that comic book, or are to not be hugely familiar with X-Men villains, Arcade is to have this thing called Murder World. And I'm like, oh my god. Whenever I'm to see Murder World being thrusted into a video game, I'm like, I'm going to have a good time here. And I absolutely do. Of course, the classic X-Men covers are to be just kind of pinball machines in just kind of a video game-esque like theme. So Arcade is an amazing character that I would like to have hoped that at some point would be used in the MCU, but heaven forbid we have a actual fun X-Men villain besides Magneto or besides some other goofy-esque like thing that doesn't actually have made sense for them to have had in X-Men stories. Besides the ones that I would want, like Arcade, or like eventually characters that are going to be next on this list. Man, those X-Men movies, they made some freaking awful choices when rationally there is a number of X-Men villains that could have been a million times better than any of this stuff they could have actually have put in any freaking number of those goddamn movies. But it is what it is. But also, let's get into number 9. Also, with how Arcade is to have that kind of suit and tie look and that red hair immediately making me think of Chucky, was the main reason for his visual appeal, because he is to look drastically different than any number of other X-Men or just Marvel in general characters. Moving on to number 9, Sentry. I get it. This guy just has a weird costume, but at the end of the day, also, like, he has the Void. You cannot avoid to just be interested in this character for his backstory when you are to actually go through and find a video that you know states it. We would come to find out that Sentry has gone on to live forever, but is to have some mental health issues and is to be very insane. If you were to go on and really look through this list, man, do I really like some insane characters. And so Sentry is to be one of those characters that has a Superman-esque like power set, with also having a power called the Void that he can whip out at any point to destroy some folks. So, very much almost like an anime character in a lot of ways. Kind of like Hellsing was to have been a show that I had watched. Then I'm like, oh my god, this is just like the Sentry. Oh my god, this is great. At some point, the Sentry will actually be, hopefully, in an MCU project, and people will just be like, oh my god, this character is awesome. And I'm like, yeah, hopefully they write him in a really good quality way. But regardless, Sentry is just a really interesting character. Let's move on into number 10. Number 10 is a X-Men character called Mimic. Legitimately, I get it that a lot of people could be like, well, why not Rogue? Yeah, why not Rogue? Rogue, in all honesty, when she touches people, she is to kind of carry certain powers very briefly, whereas Mimic is to simultaneously have the ability to have Wolverine claws, Cyclops' concussion blast, angel wings, a number of things all carried at the exact same time. So he is to go on and have a much more substantial ability to wield these certain powers, even much more so than than a rogue could go on and do. And also, at some point, I'm just kind of remiss if I didn't eventually add in characters like Taskmaster upon this thing, because in all actuality, like, Taskmaster is a character that can copy everybody's powers and had been showcased in the Black Widow film. And legitimately, like, that character is just be uh, a person that can take on an entire team when eventually he is to kind of copycat every single one of their certain skills. Moving on to number 11, World Breaker Hulk, Bruce Banner. So, finally, having actually the Green Hulk within this story. Yeah, a lot of people could have their own favorite kinds of Hulk. Some people could say that they like the Gray Hulk, or they can go on and like just the Immortal Hulk story, or maybe certain iterations of Hulk somewhere within there. Because eventually this character just kept going on and getting changed and continuity and whatever. And eventually, at some point, Hulk would separate with Bruce Banner and have some really interesting stories. Also, the way in which that they approach him in Avengers Earth Mightiest Heroes is also just to be a really good Hulk within that show. But anyways, World Breaker Hulk was to have been such an amazing thing that they put into comic books to have gone on. And if people were to start to forget about Hulk, because also the She-Hulk show wasn't doing him any favors, or him just kind of appearing in cameos in certain Marvel projects was to, again, not do this character any favors, because everybody had just wanted for such a long time to have a Hulk movie instead of what eventually becomes the She-Hulk show. Ugh. So yeah, so World Breaker Hulk is to have easily been on this list, and at some point, a lot of people would agree that a Hulk should be on this list. But then again, let's move on to number 12. Number 12 is Super Skrull. I get it that Secret Invasion, the show, didn't exactly do this character any favors, but in all honesty, instead of having to go on and individually pick certain Fantastic Four members to be on this list, why not go on and pick one character that has every single one of the powers? That is to be the way that a Super Skrull is to be mostly known for in the comic books. But maybe at some points there is different iterations of this character that had stolen a number of different kind of powers and whatever. I think at one point there was this rough draft Marvel game where there was going to be a Super Skrull as a villain character, and this Skrull could have stolen a number of Marvel characters' powers, and it would have been really cool to have seen that been done, but it just never did. So, sadly enough, that is to have been the heartbreaking story of that video game that was to have gotten canceled. But anyways, Super Skrull is to have easily been on this list, because whenever you are to put a Skrull in a Marvel story, it's like, all right, like, something has really picked up here, and really to be put forth as a much more so interesting thing than just having characters like Mystique, or possibly a more underrated character that can just shapeshift into looking like another character. But there's also a character that I think does shapeshift within this list that is to be an underdog story to possibly a certain kind of hero, let's just say, wink wink nudge nudge, to just kind of have people be interested in eventually how this plays out. Number 13, Hope Summers. Yeah, I get it. I already just said Madeline Pryor, but then also there is to be a kind of Phoenix-like character that has insect wings, and also is just kind of be very visually interesting if you were to kind of thumb through certain visuals about her. Very much looking more unique than, let's just say, the Phoenix Jean Grey or even Madeline Pryor herself. Uh, in all honesty, also, I wanted another female on this list, so Hope Summers just kind of fit that bill really well, and she's very powerful. But I can also say that there could be alternatives, like characters that I had gone on and mentioned prior could fit the bill in number 13 instead of Hope Summers. Um, like a Gambit or like probably even Storm to a lot of people because, hey, like how powerful Storm should really be. Why isn't Prowler here instead of Hope Summers or Black Panther or Thanos or this or that and whatever. But at the end of the day, Hope Summers was a character that I feel should actually be used and used well on a team somewhere, but legitimately, like, she is to not really be used beyond me thinking of Avengers versus X-Men, where I think she was to be actually used a lot better than anywhere else. So, moving on to number 14, Franklin Richards. So the debate, blah, 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 bleep, bleep, that's all, folks. Franklin Richards, his debut was to have found that he is to have worn a cowboyish like outfit, is to have these toy guns that ended up bizarrely firing real bullets. Because we'd come to find that Frank Richards is to be this reality warper, that it seems that whatever he is to want to go on and have the ability to do, he can go on and do so. So, for however Franklin Richards is to have been played out within the Fantastic Four world of things, this character has a power set that just cannot be ignored, regardless of how he eventually is to maybe either be a hero, villain, whatever, and also you can kind of play him as both, and it would just be a really interesting story. But other than that, Darren Fact, that's all I legitimately know about Franklin Richards. So let's go on and let's go into number 15. Number 15 is the Black Cat. So regardless of how many other female characters I had placed in front of her, Black Cat is to honestly be my favorite female Marvel character of all time. Based on just cosmetically visuals, regardless of her actual power set. Hence why she's so low on here. It's really just because of her power set. Black Cat. Legitimately, I would have gone on and wanted her to have at some point had a real long-lasting relationship with Peter Parker, but dang it, man, if Peter Parker was always after Mary Jane, and eventually had stories that were like Renew Your Vows, where at some point Mary Jane eventually became a Spider-Woman-like character, and dang it if she would have been probably a character on this list at some point. But again, Black Cat with her what if story of and her just being involved in the Spider-Man world of things was to make me just be like, oh my god, this character is just amazing looking. But then also she's to probably be a knockoff Catwoman. I don't like how she looks in the more current Spider-Man video games, because I like her in the traditional way that she looks. But it is what it is. So yeah, so Black Cat is to be number 15. Let's go on to number 16. Number 16, we finally have a Wolverine variation, character, whatever. Old Man Logan. I get it that this is kind of the weaker Wolverine version, but also when going through the Old Man Logan story, I could like that a lot more than any of the other kind of Wolverine tales. Hence why me having him on this list, and eventually having him forced to be put into the main Marvel continuity of comic books because he is just to have done that well as far as story is concerned. So, Old Man Logan eventually is to have this kind of post-apocalyptic story with it, and there's some kind of weird things going on between both Hulk and She-Hulk, but hey, we just have to go on and forget about all that because there's a lot of good that also comes out of that story. And With Old Man Logan, there's to be these kind of just Easter egg things within that story, and we can enjoy that all the more when we are to thumb through the cover slash pages of his comic books. Moving on. Number 17, Venom and A. Brock. So, for those of you that are to go on and say that his movies are very meh, because they probably are, Venom and A. Brock is to be really well done within the comic books, and also even in video games, they do him very well. And even animated series, they actually do him very well. Any other thing besides actual live action movies, they do him very well. So, if anything, when he was to have been in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, I was to have gone on and been more interested about his journey rather than Carnage's. And eventually they kept lumping Venom in with Carnage consistently as if they're just kind of a buddy cop thing going on. But if anything, I was always just like, well, yeah, but what is that Venom doing? Even though Carnage would have probably been a lot more powerful symbiote, still, I would always just be interested in what is that Venom doing. There would also probably be a number of other Venom symbiotes that I would probably have liked even more so than Venom himself. Eventually, stuff like Agent Venoms or possibly alternative symbiotes like Scream or Maniac, I believe. But the classic Venom character is to be just an interesting thing also within this list. So, with that said, yeah, like, also there are, like, what if things about Venom of, like, well, what if Venom would have become a number of other kind of characters and just kind of took them on and become, like, Hulk Venom or Thor Venom or this and that and whatever and have you, and like eventually just went on to just consume all of these Marvel characters and just become more powerful. How would those stories be interesting enough to have played out? And eventually they were really cool and good and whatever. So with that said, like, Venom is a really underrated character if people don't like him anyways. But then also there has to be stuff like Absolute Carnage. That story was to put together a really good Carnage story as well as also a really good Venom story. And also that is to have been a thing stolen and be put in place in the Spider-Man 2 video game if people did not know that whatsoever. Absolute Carnage, Venom Absolute Carnage was an amazing story and also was a tie-in a number of characters that were to hopefully have been brought to life through a video game. Moving on to number 18. Number 18 is Impossible Man. Man, this guy was to have been briefly used on a Fantastic Four animated series, but god dang. This character is to shapeshift into an unlimited amount of things, so kind of like a Mitsopitalik or a Batmite for you DC comic book readers. And so this character, for how he's to be called Impossible, is to also have him really as well be unstoppable. Really, in the episode, I believe that Impossible Man is to kind of befriend the Fantastic Four, but the more and more we see Impossible Man, we realize, man, this character is really annoying. To the point where he annoys the Fantastic Four into having him just become their enemy. And they start to face off against one another, but then the Fantastic Four realizes, like, man, like, this guy is just so powerful that we just can't take him on. So we have to figure out a way to just kind of mend fences and have him just kind of go on to our side of things because, man, like, he's just so powerful. So yeah, so hence why my listing of him so up here instead of him rationally being a character that is to be so probably unheard of by a lot of people. Moving on to number 19. Number 19, Doctor Doom. Doom is coming. Oh, all that I am is Doom. Doctor Doom. Anyways, so I feel kind of forced to put Doctor Doom on here, even though he's been so heavily used freaking everywhere. He's always the final boss bad guy in a number of video games and stories. 90s X-Men, he is to be the big bad in the Secret War story. He is to have gone on and mixed it up between any number of villains in the comic books, going on and being a big threat to the Fantastic Four, but then eventually mixing it up with characters like Iron Man and possibly any other kind of superheroes within his time, Avengers, and so on and so forth. And eventually him being the next big threat for the MCU. Regardless of how eventually his Fantastic Four movies played out, legitimately, he's a really substantial villain. And also, at some point, like, this guy just kind of ran out of things to do. That at some point he just became an Iron Man. When Iron Man was legitimately dead. So that was a really cool story. That was a really cool tale for how brief that it really was. But then eventually the real legitimate Iron Man just kind of came back, and eventually they figured out a way to revive that character technically. So yeah, let's go on and move on to number 20. Sandman. Sandman is a very underrated Spider-Man villain. And in all honesty, Sandman really is to have been a character that had kind of played the fence, had also been a hero and a villain. Mostly villain, but at some points he had teamed up with Silver Sable and been a good guy. At some point, teaming up with Spider-Man to be a good guy. But then also you would kind of see him as this kind of Stay Puft the Marshmallow Man kind of villain, where he's to go on and become massive and a huge threat to the Spider-Man world of things, and also have the abilities quasi like Carnage, and be able to make his fists into deadly objects of sorts. So yeah, hammers and maces and so on and so forth. To have him also kind of open up the Spider-Man 2 video game was a sight to behold. Of like, all right, this is great, because this should have been a villain that they should have obviously used so early. What they had him in that story, him trying to regain his mind, was just kind of rather interesting, or his memories and whatever. That was really just cool. So yeah, Sandman, if he is to be a overrated character, is to also just be an underrated character. So that said, let's move on to number 21. 21, Mighty Thor Jane Foster. If anything, in all honesty, I probably could have taken this character and had alternatives for this number. But I wanted a Thor character in here somewhere, and I don't really like Loki all that much. I don't really like Thor. I don't like Odin. I don't really like Sith. I don't. A lot of those Asgardian characters, Valkyrie. I don't really like any of those characters, but I did like it how like the Mighty Thor was to be a mystery of like who this character was for the longest time, and then also just Jane Foster's story of her eventually getting cancer and winding up being able to somehow become a Thor was really something to behold. Having her to eventually be part of a Avengers team was just awesome to see in comic books, for how they were to go on and just kind of use her within this team, and having her just kind of play off of who the newer rung of Avengers were was just kind of really fun. Regardless of how Love and Thunder turned out, because Love and Thunder is just kind of meh, and it is just to be too much of a jokey movie to have me want to go on and legitimately take it whatsoever as a good value film, to just meh it and walk away. But anything, I just like Jane Foster probably in that film. Moving on, number 22. The Thing, Ben Grimm. So yeah, if I haven't already talked about the Super Skrull, to have had all the Fantastic Four powers in one character, still there is some clobbering time going on here that I felt that I needed to have the Thing in here somewhere within this list. Regardless of how, like, well, he's just a strong guy. You've had a number of strong characters. If anything, my favorite superpower is strength, anyways. So, and also, they've kind of adjusted Ben Grimm at some points in movies and comic books and stuff. So, like, it's not just all about him being strong and him just having durable skin. Like, at some points, this character is to be able to, uh, like, take its rock-like ability and kind of change it and shift it and whatever. So, like, Ben Grimm over time has really changed into a much more interesting character, and as well as also me liking how, like, his first initial run was him being this monstrous character that eventually becomes a mascotish thing for the Fantastic Four. So yeah, easy reason for him being so highly on this list, and also him to be kind of rolled into a number of other stories beyond just the Fantastic Four label. So, anyways, let's move on into number 23. Number 23 is actually Carnage. Yes, absolute Carnage was the main reason for me to legitimately have Carnage on this list, because really I could have gone on and not had him on this list, because not every single symbiote is to, in my eyes, be a thing that I need to have on here. Like, I really could have alternatively had other characters besides Carnage on this list. But then again, also, people would have wanted Carnage on this list and wanted him a lot higher, even swapping with the place of Venom Eddie Brock. But for how Carnage is a Joker-like character, and also how he is to have a better even power set than actually Venom does, still, Carnage to me is to honestly also be a very annoying like character. If you ever play him in video game or against him in video games, or are to see him in animated stuff, always very annoying. At some point, there was, I think, a Spider-Man cartoon where Thanos and Carnage had merged together and had a really interesting just kind of episode to just kind of put together there. So I'm like, oh my god, yeah. That was really cool. I think it was either a Guardians of the Galaxy episode or it was a Spider-Man thing. Either way, Spider-Man and Guardians of the Galaxy were teamed up together to just make for a really interesting episode. Moving on to number 24. Number 24 is Superior Iron Man. I get it, everybody has their favorite Iron Man. Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, Avengers Endgame Iron Man, whatever. I also was to have cosmetically liked the way that Superior Iron Man's suit was, regardless of how, in all honesty, Tony Stark being Superior Spider-Man made him a dick. But if anything, it just also made his character just really interesting as well, to just kind of play off the fact that this character is to be so much grandiose and whatever. But anyways, finally, we actually have an Iron Man on this list, at least, because maybe I was just kind of pondering not having much of the Avengers even on this list, but I just kind of kept back and forthing to like, okay, well, let's put something on here. A lot of people could also have liked certain kinds of Iron Man, like Extremuses or whatever, and I'm not giving you that kind of Iron Man. If anything, I could just have slapped the word Iron Man on here, and people would just be like, oh yeah, so-and-so Iron Man is my favorite, oh yeah, And I would have just been like, well, yeah, I'm going to mention every single one of the Iron Mans that have ever existed. Iron Spider, or whatever. Like, there's a ton of different kinds of Iron Man like characters. There's at some point to have like an Asgardian Iron Man that eventually was to have been in Earth Midas Heroes. So there are heavily, massively different kinds of Iron Man suits, and some of them are more powerful than others. Some of them are to snap away and kill off a whole entire alien species and whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm here to say that Superior Spider-Man would have actually been an interesting thing to roll into the MCU, because it seemed that there was a whole lot of people that wanted Tom Cruise to have somehow been an Iron Man in the MCU when it came down to the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness movie. But sadly enough, for whatever goofy reason, that just never happened. But I think also Benedict Cumberbatch had told the audience, like, well, yeah, like, I heard a lot of people, there were rumblings that everybody wanted this, but legitimately we just could not have got it done. But then also, I don't think that they were ever really going to have it be done. It is what it is. Moving on to number 25. Jack-O-Lantern. What the fuck? Who is this character? Why are you listing this character? He's another comic book character that I had gone on to, at first, had him showcase himself on a Agent Venom story. And I was like, oh my god, who is this character? Like, yeah, he's probably a very much ripoff of Green Goblin or Hobgoblin, so what better way to just kind of say those characters should have probably been on this list. But Jack-O-Lantern is to have a supernatural thing of a look to him, so I was easily swayed and won over by this character, regardless of how legitimately unknown he is. So yeah, all the more reason to have wanted to put Jack-O-Lantern on here, because he's just cool looking. Anyways, let's move on. Number 26, Agent Venom. Oh wow, what a coincidence. Wow, I put Agent Venom on here. So, Agent Venom had a really interesting story as him being Flash Thompson and him being forced into a wheelchair, but then again, bonding to the symbiote so he can be back in action, doing all of these kind of much more stealthy Venom stories instead of him actually becoming Venom and losing control, which eventually does happen somewhere. But yeah, so Agent Venom is to have been a really interesting story, and eventually he got rolled into stuff like Thunderbolts and just a number of other projects that at the end of the day were to be like, oh cool, like I can pick up this book to just kind of see more of what's going on with Flash Thompson or the Agent Venom symbiote, because again, I liked how it was just kind of a toned down Venom character, and I think that was much more interesting than just the normal run of just Venom, so I thought that was cool. Moving on. 27. This is to be Lilith. This is to have me state that this character was to have been awesome when she was used in the Ghost Rider story. I think that story eventually climaxes or whatever with finding out that Johnny Blaze and Danny Ketch were both brothers. For whatever reason, I think they tried to figure out how to do that in Ghost Rider 2. Whatever it is, what it is. But so, really with Lilith, like, if you look at her visually, I'm just like, heck yeah. Like, this character was awesome. I think at some points she was to try to be used in other projects like Blades and Midnight Suns and all these kind of other supernatural things. But I really don't think they ever really did the character good enough justice beyond that original kind of showcasing of her being in a book somewhere. So yeah, so obviously Lilith has a pretty substantial power set to have her reasonably be in this list somewhere. Moving on to number 28. Captain America, Sam Wilson. I get it. Everybody's jam is that Steve Rogers Captain America, and there is a number of other just kind of Captain America stories that could have been way better than Captain America Sam Wilson. But in all honesty, the way that they were to put him in much more so comic books than maybe even the Falcon and Winter Soldier's tale was to have had me just be like, all right, like I like Falcon. Captain America. I can like Sam Wilson being Captain America, and the fact that they were to have gone on and actually given Falcon the super soldier serum because of blood transfusions. So yeah, really was to say like, well, hey, like it's the same exact freaking character as Steve Rogers. The only real difference is one has wings, one doesn't. So really, yeah, like I could have gone on and stated instead of having Sam Wilson be here, that maybe a character like Black Panther could have been easily used within his place. But again, I just liked Captain America's Sam Wilson just a little bit more. So, moving on to number 29, Mephisto. So if you two already know that I like Ghost Rider books, Mephisto is to be a huge, heavy villain in most of those. Going on to talk about Marvel Damnation, where there is a whole supernatural team that faces off eventually against Mephisto. And also, we have to bring up the Spider-Man One More Day story that ruined Spider-Man forever to make people forced to read comic books like Renew Your Vows, or eventually whatever is to be what is going on with Spider-Man currently, where he is to get married with Mary Jane. Really telling us exactly when this video is going to come out. I haven't heard much of the stories of what's going on with the newer Spider-Man. I know that it's very boring right now. I know there's something going on with Green Goblin and Spider-Man, but it is what it is. But yeah, so Mephisto is to kind of be randomly used as a big bad guy, or a person who is to kind of just grant certain wishes and whatever. At the end of the day, I think also I probably could have used Doctor Strange in this list somewhere, but definitely I still would have chosen Mephisto over Doctor Strange. Just because he's much more interesting. Anyways, moving on. Number 30 is Darkhawk, and you're like, what the fuck? Like, why do you have this character? He is a character that everyone hates, but they love him anyways, because he's never used all that well, or also you don't really get to see him all that often anyways. The biggest selling point to me for Darkhawk was to have read Avengers Arena. To have a Darkhawk be put place in that story, just for that Darkhawk to die, and then have the Darkhawk armor transfer to another character and to continue on with that story, I was like, all right, I'm sold. Like, this makes me want to check out this character even more so. But then also, you kind of really want to figure out a way to root for this character at some freaking point. Just like, man, I want this character to be somehow used in some kind of MCU-like thing, but it'll never happen. Or really, the character will be used as a joke. If anything, I think you could use Darkhawk as a villain or as a hero, and people are just like, yeah, Darkhawk! Because there are always just to be these really bad characters that people still love anyways, like a Squirrel Girl or like a Howard the Duck. So what the fuck? Let's go on and go into another number here. Number 31, Moon Knight. So, when Moon Knight was to have actually had a story that is actually readable, I had went into it and just been like, oh my god, this is freaking awesome. When they had gone on and finally played with the fact that Moon Knight is to have been a character that you don't know if he's crazy or if he is to legitimately going through all of this stuff, that's what made the character a lot more interesting. That really good, more current run of Moon Knight, where he is to go through these multiple personality characters, and at some point he is to be Mark Spector, but then not Mark Spector. He's to be someone else, and how is that all going to play out? Really forced us to realize that this character is way more interesting than we ever thought. Having him to be possibly forced to be stated as the Marvel Batman is not exactly a bad thing. But at the end of the day, also, he is to have these kind of unusual moon gadgets and whatever, as well as just have a very interesting get-up attire and whatever for whichever personality he's to actually be at whichever time. So, Moon Knight, 31. If anything, he probably could have been any number of ways of numbers on this list, or probably not even on it at all, because some people don't like Moon Knight. But I find his books to just be fun, as well as also really actually liking the Moon Knight show. Moving on. Multiple Man. So my real, true, legitimate appeal, forcibly, of Multiple Man was just the fact that he was to have been in X-Men Last Stand. But then again, there was a possibility that at some point there was going to legitimately be a Multiple Man movie with James Franco that seemed to have never happened or never picked up steam. Maybe in someday we will actually have him in possibly a Deadpool film or some kind of X-Men thing. Don't know. But then again, I am not holding my breath to see if Multiple Man is ever going to get used again. Because technically we've already had him in a X-Men film, so I can just rest on that fact that he's existed somewhere. Multiple Man is to be able to multiply himself and legitimately via a numbers game just kind of put up a very interesting story. He eventually is to be, of course, part of certain teams, and it is kind of funny in that way because this character doesn't legitimately need to be on a team because he can technically be his own team. But then again, the ways in which that he is to have been placed into things is to really just be kind of fun anyways. So with that said, Multiple Man at 32. Moving on. Cosmic Ghost Rider Frank Castle. I probably could have had a slot opened up for a number of other Marvel characters instead of saying this character, but like, this character is unique enough that it needs to really just be separated from the other Ghost Riders because it's to be this much more space astronaut Lobo-ish looking character. And when I was to realize that this character exists, I'm like, I need to find something about him. So again, he was just kind of rolled into later on this story with Robbie Reyes and the Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider, and I was like, oh man, this is just so entertaining to have him be used within him being with the Avengers at that time, and just kind of being this foe, but then, like realizing, hey guys, like, this is the reason why I'm here, even though he was a very confused like character. So yeah, Cosmic Ghost Rider, Frank Castle, visually interesting, hence my real feel of appeal of putting him on this list somewhere. Moving on. Number 34, Slapstick. So this is a very much Looney Tune-ish character that had been involved in Deadpool stories, as well as just kind of a number rung of other things. But yeah, like, this character, again, visual appeal more so than anything else to make me be like, oh, this is kind of like a Roger Rabbit kind of character in real world. So if anything, because of how this character can just have stuck out, made me all the reason more of wanting to stick him in this list. So let's move on. Also realizing that Daredevil had never made this list, and I know a lot of people could have liked the Daredevil show, or other Daredevil things that at some point he had been in, but really Daredevil is not going to be on this list because Like, yeah, for how great his comic books are or how great the show was. Really, Daredevil has always been presented as a very meh character that you have to really um, use him very well for people to really pay attention. And even that, it's just like that's to be a quickly passing thing. But anyways, let's go on to number 35. Gambit! Yay! I didn't remember if I had him on this list or not, because eventually we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of characters where I have to just kind of second guess whether or not they're even on this list, because I don't know how many things of combinations that I've kind of gone through at this point to have put this list together. I feel that also, like, the Marvel list is a heck of a lot harder than the DC list because there's obviously easy choices for the DC list for me than there is the Marvel one. Because Marvel has a billion other characters, whereas DC like has, in all honesty, in my mind, a limited set of characters that I find rather interesting. But anyways, Gambit. You guys know that he is to be a really more interesting character in the X-Men 97 animated series. But then also, I don't like how Gambit is to just be this kind of underground, underworld kind of guy who is to just kind of make these kind of deals with these people. It is to be part of these kind of assassin organizations, and also that power set, though. Really, how they go on and use him in X-Men 97, I'm like, oh my god, this should have been how they should have ever used Gambit, ever, and this is freaking amazing. Of course, Gambit has always been tied with Rogue, but you know what? Legitimately, I can not go on and justify having Rogue on this list. If anything, if Gambit is to be on this list, maybe Rogue is to be right alongside him. But, like, legitimately, I cannot go on and justify Rogue because there are just so many other characters that can steal powers that are just better than Rogue. It is the case. But yeah, so Gambit with his playing card wielding ability was to make me just so in awe of this character, as well as also him having that kind of just staff that he always has, and how he just looks visually is just all the more in accents and everything. Just his character is a very interesting, one of a kind like Cat that eventually I want to see him at some point in the MCU, god dang it. How they have not gone on and made a solo Gambit film baffles the crap out of me. Yeah, we did have him technically in stuff like Wolverine Origins, which was blah, and at some point people are desperately hoping that this character is to somehow get used in Deadpool and Wolverine, but I highly probably doubt it. Or if anything, I would naturally assume if he is to go on and get used in Deadpool Wolverine, he will not get used probably all that well. Sadly enough. Um but we are to be forced to have that cross to bear. So dare say let's move on past this Gambit character. Also, I think at some point people have tried to do like some kind of Gambit projects that looked really interesting via the fan made stuff that they were to actually have been to just kind of pitch these solo Gambit series. And I was like, yeah, like I think Gambit does have enough real estate uh, of stuff to work with that you can go and do a solo Gambit story. Moving on to number 36. Number 36 is Magneto. I honestly question to have even had Magneto on this list because there are more powerful characters as well as also I never really liked Magneto because he was a very preachy guy. But then again, they did try to change the character over the years to not have him just be this preachy, annoying guy, which he was all about, like mutant and proud and whatever. They tried to also at some points make Magneto a hero, and when he was to go on and don that white costume, made for just a really interesting story. But then also, there was that run of Magneto being involved in comic books where he was kind of pondering what helmet he should be wearing, or to have had a afterlife tale of him and Storm trying to go on and figure out who they are to really be now instead of the people they have been in the past. But yeah, Magneto technically does in some ways deserve to be on this list as either a hero or a villain, but at the end of the day, you can just say that he's here. Good enough, right? And also, at some points, he's to really just outsmart even smart guys like Charles Xavier. So, huzzah, huzzah. Next on this list, Purple Man. I get that maybe a lot of people may have not liked Purple Man in the Jessica Jones show. But then eventually I would go on and see Purple Man in these just kind of random projects, or also have seen Purple Man in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. And really gone on to see how Purple Man could be a huge threat for any number of teams, and to really, in my mind, put together a really interesting story. Kind of like how in the DC comic books of things, we would eventually have characters like Gorilla Grodd that would really be sticking it to a number of Justice League or otherwise DC characters. But anyways, Purple Man looks very interesting, and also with his purple color, again, very almost grimace-esque. He really stands out when you're to thumb through a book to figure out who you are to pick next on a top 50 characters list. Moving on to number 38. Finally, a Peter Parker here. A lot of people will probably go on and be like, well, hey, I like blah, blah, blah Peter Parker variant or variation or whatever. And Into the Spider-Verse and the Spider-Verse comic books will have given you a plethora of different Spider-Man to choose from. As well as also me thinking or realizing that Spider-Punk is not actually on this list, and he should have been, because I actually really liked the Spider-Punk story. If anything, in all honesty, if I would have changed this to have been Spider-Punk, I would have rationalized that decision, because I had gone to see a video about Spider-Punk's comic book, and I loved it. It was freaking awesome. So, if I could have had a spot for Spider-Punk on here, he would have been on here. But anyways, that's just the sad thing about me. If anything, also, if I could have actually put Spider-Man Miles Morales, I would have. Freaking that guy, eventually when his stories are not to be as boring when you start to go into them, because man, are they just a slow slog of, like, the guy Miles Morales isn't even in the Spider-Man costume. It takes a number of comic books before he actually gets to the Spider-Man costume. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, why am I reading this? Like, it takes him to like the 8th issue or something to actually get in the freaking costume and fight some crime, god dang it. I'm like, oh my god. So, as well as it also, within the very first Miles Morales Spider-Man movie, like, we have to earn the suit. And I'm like, whatever. Like, so he wears like a Spider-Man Peter Parker costume for a while, and then becomes the black and red. Ugh, whatever. But anyways, the number 38 here is to not sadly be the paper bag Fantastic Four Peter Parker Spider-Man costume. It's instead to go on and be the black suit Spider-Man or the Superior Spider-Man. So I'm to go on, and at some points with characters like the villain or more harsher, more grittier side of certain characters instead of the happy-go-lucky whatever, you're going to go on, and when you get into the DC list of things, find out that I don't actually like Superman whatsoever. And Superman, I hope, will not be at that list at all. With the exclusion of one to state that, like, maybe Injustice Superman should have actually been in there, but I don't like even really Injustice Superman all that well. Because eventually, like, the the books just kind of dip in quality over time. But so, like that makes me want to go on and also think that I never was to have had Hyperion in this list because he just reminds me too much of Superman. But then again, he's an evil Superman. Gosh darn it. There are so many characters that I would have loved to have had on this list, like Captain Carrots and kind of weird, goofy crap. But again, I only have 50 slots for all this, and I kept having to adjust this list freaking a number of goddamn times. So, I liked Superior Spider-Man for how he was to have been or darker, and also Doc Ock, and he was to have actually killed people and beaten people to death, and just kind of like, hey, am I funny now? Am I a joke to you now? Am I this? Am I that? And he would just go on and just lay into people. And I'm like, yeah. But then also we'd have the Black Suit Spider-Man that was to give us stuff like Back in Black, and also was to give us yeah, and we have to make a joke about that. But then also when we had Black Suit Spider-Man in Spider-Man 3, that stuff was a lot more interesting beyond the dancing than the normal kind of Spider-Man stuff. So legitimately with that, I like Black Suit Spider-Man. Regardless of how, like, within a comic book, he's to probably not be as visually pleasing of probably how he was to also have been done within the Spider-Man 3 movie, let's just say. So anyways, let's move on to 39. Kraven the Hunter. Yes, Kraven is to go on and possibly have his own film. For how long, that's probably going to get delayed or whatever. Maybe it's already out. Have no clue. I'm not in a rush to see Kraven the Hunter, the film. But when he was also to have been in Spider-Man 2, I was like, oh man, Kraven the Hunter is actually used good. As well as also him being used very good in the 90s Spider-Man animated series. Kraven the Hunter, I really liked that he was to be this kind of very jungle man, and also he was to have been this tracker that can be able to sniff out a certain scent of a character and be able to find them anywhere, which made him a much more appealing foe. Kraven the Hunter also could have really just been substituted for a litany of other characters that probably would have been way better off being on this list than actually Kraven himself. Like looking at kind of visually interesting other Spider-Man villains like Mephisto or Doc Ock, or also because I've technically had a Doc Ock, which is Superior Spider-Man. So, but then also having Kraven the Hunter here is really just to realize like how much I was just to try to figure out how to get this list done as well. Also, alternatives to have been for Kraven the Hunter may have rationalized characters like Sabretooth, because Sabretooth is almost the exact same looking as Kraven the Hunter. But anyways, let's go on and let's move to another number 40. Chasm Ben Reilly. I get it. A lot of people be like, Ben Reilly? Like, but then again, bizarrely, it's kind of weird when going through the very first Spider-Man video game, everybody would go on and pick the Ben Reilly suit that was Scarlet Spider. But then again, people probably won't go on and also choose the Chasm suit when eventually the other game would roll out. I liked Chasm when he was to a premiere. I'm like, oh my god, like, we have a Ben Reilly that's unhinged and also to seemingly be evil, and he's to be tied with Madeline Pryor. All right. I want to see how that story plays out. Ooh, all right. And it really added something to a character that no one really cared about, but I did. Because really, Ben Reilly for the longest time was just a clone of Peter Parker, and was to also be goofily used in the Spider-Verse movies. And so changing him up as Chasm was, I think, a needed change. But then again, people could probably have said otherwise, or said you probably could have used Miles Morales here instead of Ben Reilly. Again, I like the fact that we had Chasm as his purple costume-ish like thing, and literally having another Spider-Man on this list was just kind of nice for a change. Moving on to number 41. Blade. If I am to go on and tell you, yes, I like supernatural characters, I feel that I couldn't have ignored having Blade on this list. Regardless of how eventually a Blade series was to have been put together, or regardless of how his movies was to have been less stellar or great or whatever throughout, and eventually there is to be a possible video game coming out of Blade, or there is to be possibly another Blade movie coming somewhere down the pipeline. And we could yay or nay this character much more so than we ever have. Blade is to obviously be a daywalking vampire that had faced off against Deacon Frost and Dracula himself. And we really have to go on and, in a supernatural setting, call upon Blade much more so than probably any other supernatural character. Because it's easier, because legitimately, this character is to always have been some kind of awesome, regardless of who is to have either voiced him or been a live-action version of him. So, with that said, Blade is just freaking cool. So yeah, that's why I was to go on and have him justifiably on this list, compared to a lot of other characters. Moving on. 42. Nova, Sam Alexander. So I think the power set of Nova makes him much more appealing than who he actually is to go on and be. Or legitimately, if people are to say Nova Corps freaking sucked in the MCU, I get it. But then they also wanted to turn around and eventually do something with Nova in the MCU, but just something never came up. But who knows? So Sam Alexander is to be much more known as the black and red and gold Nova, and I honestly like that color scheme. If anything, I think Noah was kind of ruined with Ultimate Spider-Man, as they just called him a buckethead, and the character was kind of annoying. But you could not still ignore that power set. Like, Nova ends up becoming a space cop. And again, if I am to not have given a rip about any of the Guardians of the Galaxy characters within this list, at least there is to have been Nova here instead of probably Drax or Rocket Raccoon or Adam Warlock, which is to have been a really powerful character that they made just so stupidly look in Volume 3. Why do we need Adam Warlock in that movie whatsoever? But I do realize that there is a lot more substantial, powerful cosmic characters like Galactus and Thanos and whatever, and I'm just picking Nova of all things. But I had gone on to read a plethora of the Sam Alexander Nova books, and I really enjoyed them. So give me a freaking break. Because I just like this story. Moving on. 43, Werewolf by Night. So beyond his brief theatrical release of a Halloween special, Werewolf by Night, in the very early stages of that character, was, via comic books, really interesting. But then again, they ended up changing the way that that character was to go on and be in the comic books, and really kill that character, in all honesty. So if you're going to go on and check out some Werewolf by Night stuff, go on and check out his early stuff. At some point, Werewolf by Night was to have been rolled into a Moon Knight story, so all the more reason to, if you want both Werewolf by Night and Moon Knight, check out both of those because those are to be really interesting characters, really interesting cats. And a lot of people are to go on and talk about the Moon Knight show and just be like, "Hey, hopefully we have Werewolf by Night in the Moon Knight show." Uh because rationally that would be a safe bet to just kind of make for an interesting show, and plus also add a character that I think people actually wanted instead of that female character that we were just kind of forced to be like, okay, whoever she is. They should have had Werewolf by Night, obviously. But that is to be number 43 upon my list. If anything, I think I'm going to have a really hard time with number 50 justifying this character on this list, but I think it was also a joke thing to throw that on there because I know that there was a billion other characters I could have probably put as number 50. Anyways, number 44, Titanium Man. Like, I get it that this character is like, who? What? There's several different versions of Titanium Man, and I would have gone on and played against Titanium Man in a video game, and for the life of me, I could not have gone on and like stated after that that character didn't make a huge impression on me, regardless if I was to have even forgotten what his actual name was. But yeah, Titanium Man is to be a very interesting character, and at some point would want him to have been checked out by people. But then also I know that there could have been a alternate character I could have put instead of Titanium Man, like a Juggernaut, or like another Iron Man character, like War Machine, or Crimson Dynamo, or Ironmonger, or Killmonger, or or Black Panther, or Ironheart for some people that like that character for some goofy reason. I never cared for Ironheart. Maybe in some variations of her, I was like, okay, this is cosmetically pleasing, but then again, a lot of crap done with that character. But then also they did a Wakanda Forever thing that just like okay, ugh. So yeah, Titanium Man is on here, but I know that there are better suited characters and better substitutions. But I also just kind of like Titanium Man. But if I were to have swapped him legitimately, I would have said Juggernaut here. Besides Titanium Man, so that's a goof on my part. Anyways, moving on. 45, Ultron, Age of Ultron. Yeah, this character is to go on and have a many plethora of different ways that this character has been written over the years. Him being tied with Hank Pym much more so than Bruce Banner and Tony Stark within the comic books. And him becoming a very massive threat for him to go on and consistently being used in animated projects as like, oh my god, it's Ultron, or really have him actually get the Age of Ultron Avengers movie, which was to have been amazing. How they kind of rolled in that whole Pinocchio thing and made the kind of Pinocchio thing seem really creepy, and made Ultron seem really creepy. So with that said, yeah, could have been Apocalypse here, could have been other robotic characters, but I chose Ultron. Moving on. 46, Hulkling, or really just Brawn also. The Amadeus Cho Hulk. I get it that these characters are to be who, what now, when it comes down to Hulk characters. And there could have been much more interesting things to have rolled in here, like Doc Samson or the Leader or whatever. Because eventually people will go on and see Brave New World and just be like, oh, Leader, whatever. But I like Hulkling because he is to be a Hulk that is to be able to sprout wings and fly and just kind of do much more interesting things than a lot of other Hulk characters. Regardless of how he is to heavily be barely used within the whole entire scope of Marvel altogether. him to eventually be tied to Wiccan in the comic books, and to never be remembered ever again past that is to just be a huge loss. But I think once they had gone on to do Amadeus Cho, they kind of quickly forgot that Hulkling was even a thing, and started to roll out the whole Braun story, and try to make us forget about Hulkling. But yeah, Braun, of course, is to have been Amadeus Cho, the very high intelligent character that they just kind of force down our throats, but eventually he becomes an actual Hulk. And the way of which they approach this Braun character, I'm like, wow, visually he looks freaking awesome. And then they give him that white and purple costume, which I was like, all right, like kind of She-Hulk, but then also not She-Hulk. So I was won over by this character, and the more that I would go on and eventually play him in certain mobile games and eventually get to know more about him, I was like, all right, like Amadeus Cho, Braun, he's a cool cat. He's a cool character. So reasonably, hence the reason why he's on this list, even though there probably are better Hulk characters or Marvel characters in general. Moving on. Number 47. Doctor Strange, Brother Voodoo. So, with how powerful or how strong Doctor Strange legitimately is here, I felt forced to eventually put Doctor Strange in this list here somewhere, because I think in the DC realm of things, I wanted to put characters in like Doctor Fate within my DC list. So, I just felt kind of sad if I didn't somewhere put in Doctor Strange. I did like Doctor Strange's films. But then also I also liked Brother Voodoo, that I think at some point they changed to Doctor Voodoo because people are just kind of about the whole brother name. Uh but yeah, so Doctor Strange and Brother Voodoo are really good magical characters, and at some point it'll be really interesting to see how these characters are to be possibly used next in the DC world of things, or even in animated stuff, because it is always fun to see them kind of pop up here and there in these animated stories. Uh, at some point, Doctor Strange is to be well used, and I think Ultimate Spider-Man's, and also is to have had at some point his own animated film, which he was kind of teamed up with a lot of other supernatural-ish like characters, and as like a team thing, and that was to actually have been rather interesting compared to other Doctor Strange animated projects that I think weren't as good or well put together, but anything, whatever. Brother Voodoo, not very used all that often in actual MCU projects, but eventually there is some interesting ways that I think Brother Voodoo is used, I think, in like kind of Deadpool books or whichever. But let's go on and move past that. 48 is Man Thing. So if you were to go on and know that I like big, massive, interesting looking characters, Man Thing is to be one of them. I was so happy when Man Thing was actually to have been used in the Werewolf by Night story, because like, oh my god, it's Man Thing. Man Thing is to be kind of a very Swamp Thing-esque like character. He was to have at some point have his own film, which probably not a lot of people remember. But then yeah, also he's to just kind of be sporadically used in these little projects. Man Thing is to not only have an amazing strength, and is to kind of have healing factors and whatever when he is to just be near by his environment, which is to be a forest of plenty. Man Thing also has this kind of electric like power that he's to be able to conjure up and fight his foes with. So yeah, like Man Thing is a very underrated character that eventually people don't realize how good or how strong Man Thing actually is. And so a lot of people are probably sleeping on Man-Thing. So it would be nice if people were to have gone on and checked him out. Moving on to number 49. Chameleon. Chameleon is a mostly Spider-Man foe that I think just does not get enough freaking credit. Yeah, he is to basically be like a low-budget Mystique. If anything, a lot of people would be like, why did you use Chameleon here? Why didn't you use Mystique? Mystique does the exact same thing. I get it. But then also, like, I feel at one point that Chameleon, honestly, would make for a really good Spider-Man villain MCU thing if they took the time and actually tried to do something with him. Like, he could really be a really good threat if we hadn't already seen stuff kind of similar to that with Mephisto. But still, like, I feel that a lot of people are sleeping on Chameleon here, and I think that there is somewhere down the road a really good Chameleon story that could be told, probably with the Spider-Man video games, if they ever go on and do a sequel to the Miles Morales story, or if they go and do another Spider-Man or Venom solo run game, because I feel like people have gone on to state that there may be a Venom game coming. So, what better thing to do to use Chameleon in those stories to just kind of mess with characters and make us think that the story is heading one way when it actually isn't? So, Chameleon, I think, is so underrated, but then again, there's a number of other characters that can shapeshift into other people, but still, I just want Chameleon to be used at some point. Gosh darn it. I get also that, like, having Skrulls into the MCU has kind of killed this character, but still, ugh, it irks me that this character did not get used, sadly enough. Moving on to number 50. Number 50 is Howard the Duck. I get it, a lot of people will say that this is to be a character that no one likes, but still wants to root for regardless, even though how stupid he is. And also, he keeps getting used in Guardians of the Galaxies and in What If stuff. But man, I like Howard the Duck just because he's a goofy character. I also liked the Howard the Duck movie. And man, like, to just have Howard the Duck in the Marvel comic books where he is to just kind of force that, like, yeah, I get that nobody likes me, but, like, I'm going to be in this book anyways, and we're going to have a fun time. Like, that's what Howard the Duck just kind of forces in every one of these stories. He makes me look at characters in the comic book world in a different way. Like, we have goofy characters like Detective Chimp in the DC world of things, where I'm like, that character looks stupid, but god dang, am I going to have him on my 50 list somewhere in there. Because, man, do I like Detective Chimp more so than I can go on and like Howard the Duck. At some point, Kevin Smith was wanting to put together a Howard the Duck show or movie or whatever, but that just didn't eventually become a legitimate thing. Howard the Duck really is to have been a character that had almost gotten sued by Disney at one point because it looks so much like Donald Duck. But then there was to be no way that Marvel couldn't have won that whole battle, and to just kind of rub it in Marvel's noses, Howard the Duck had changed to be a mouse, to just be like, haha, like, now we look like Mickey Mouse, ha ha ha, like, they rubbed it in Marvel or Disney's noses. But come to find out both Disney and Marvel were going to work together, man, it was to have been an ironic thing. So, that's it, Howard the Duck. Yeah, he's on this list. So what? You want to fight about it? So with that said, that is to be my 50 Marvel characters. Legitimately, I'm sure a lot of people can go on and have huge gripes about all of these characters because, like, who the is this guy? Why is he even on this list? Or a lot of people can just be like, I completely agree in every way and fashion and whatever. I don't care. At the end of the day, I just had fun. And yeah, this took way too long to talk about all of this. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here so I can go on and put together the DC list so I can do another video so I have another thing to do. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.